Lilies and Yarrow, written by Venix the Lorekeeper, read by Arashi. No doctor enjoyed treating the unrequited love disease in any variant. Hanahaki was the name of the most common variant, where the flowers remained within the lungs. Harvey did not enjoy the variant that was spreading from his skin, from a very sensitive cluster of nerves on his back. The vines would spread along his flesh before embedding their thorns and blooms. This variant would strangle him if he couldn't get rid of it, a much more slow and miserable death than the possible instant ending of other variants. It hurt to prune the vines and flowers. When he pulled the white blooms from their vines, they slightly bled in his own blood, tests revealed. The worst was the lilies, as they were much larger than their accompanying flower, the yarrow. Anyone with Hanahaki had one of two flower patterns. Either they'd have a flower corresponding to their lover, or they'd have a mix of both flowers. Everyone had a flower assigned to them. Harvey's was the small yarrow clusters, though they did not grow on a vine. Technically, it did not matter to the disease. Harvey didn't mind the yarrow. The buds were small, and they grew close to the vines, so they were easily hidden. They were even a medicinal flower. The brilliant white water lilies were much more troublesome. Sure, they only bloomed every once in a while, but they were large, unruly flowers, and while the yarrow would bleed as if it were nothing more than a pinprick, the lilies, when cut, flowed like open wounds. The flower dance had become Harvey's most dreaded day, as he knew he'd be in full bloom. It was a universal rule in the valley. All flowers bloomed for this festival in particular. It had been a painful night, trying to sleep while the most recently cut lilies sprung back to life. But now the day was here, and there was no avoiding it. He tried to avoid the blooms as best he could as he slipped into his blue coat. It was just one day of blooming pain, and soon as the dance was over, he'd go home. Harvey must have seemed eager, as he was one of the first to arrive at the flower dance. He wasn't too early, however, as moments later Leah arrived, dragging the rest of the girls who would be dancing behind her. It wasn't long after that many others from around town showed up. Harvey watched them from his shady corner, just hoping to get things over with. That was when he watched Elliott arrive. When Harvey saw Elliott, his heart leapt in a massive cluster of awe and concern. It was no surprise that once again Elliott had braided flowers into his hair for the occasion. He did it every year. What surprised Harvey was which flowers were braided in. Then he looked closer. Grown, not braided. Harvey had barely caught a glimpse of Elliott, but he'd seen two things: thorny vines and white blooms. Usually, Elliott would opt for a more colorful arrangement, but it didn't look like he had a choice in this matter. The hopelessly pathetic and romantic side of Harvey leapt at the thought that of all people, Elliott had his matching flowers. True, he didn't know if they were matching exactly, but those vines and thorns were unmistakable. He'd never really been able to tell who made his heart ignite with love, who he had a true passion for. But that was probably because he and Elliott didn't exactly spend one-on-one time more than 1 or 2 days a year. He'd also never been good with feelings in general. The intelligent and professional side of Harvey knew that if the thorns were in Elliott's hair, he didn't have a lot of time before they twisted around his neck, maybe a few weeks at most. That would give Harvey plenty of time to get his thoughts in order and make his unrequited love requited. Harvey carefully made his way over, in hopes of getting a beggar diagnostic, hoping to go unnoticed. Elliott noticed him pretty easily and tried to invite him closer, but Harvey had all his attention on the vine that was nearly wound around Elliott's neck, at the collarbone, and he missed every word as he saw the smallest bud of yarrow. Those few weeks, Harvey imagined, shattered instantly, and so clearly that Harvey could hear them breaking, and he knew he had to do something today. He only had today. He either had to convince Elliott to let him surgically remove the most threatening vines, or he'd have to get his tangled mess of feelings together and perform some miracle act to kill the vines with true love. If he failed, Elliott would be gone. Harvey couldn't tell if it was his stomach or vine growth that lurched at the thought. He didn't want to think about what would happen if he failed. He couldn't afford to fail. It was then that he noticed Elliott was waiting for him to say something. Yes? Harvey managed to say, trying to collect himself and having no clue what he was agreeing to. Elliott seemed to fight down a laugh. You must not have heard a word I said, because I asked you how your day has been so far. Elliott said, still slightly laughing under his breath. It wasn't out of malice, of course. He was barely capable of such a thing. Harvey had to pull his now slightly less twisted emotions back together, enough to process the question. He'd forgotten just how lost he could get in Elliott's voice, and the lover in him was living for it. It's been a fine day. Thank you for asking, and repeating the question, Harvey replied, trying to put on what felt like a brave face before continuing. Lovely flowers you've got. Elliott paused for a moment, to gently stroke the lilies situated near his eye. Harvey was surprised at how well things were working out for him, with so little a plan, nothing more than an end goal, really. Thank you, Elliott said after a moment. Water lilies and some other flower. Yarrow flowers. Wildflowers with medicinal properties, Harvey said automatically, before immediately wondering if he'd said too much. Didn't know you knew about flowers, Elliott replied. As he said it, the opening bars of the melody to the dance began, the sign for everyone to gather. They had to dance. It'd be the only way to stave off the flowers fast enough without making it awkward. We've got about a minute before the dancing starts, Elliott continued. I should go find Would I suffice? Harvey hurriedly interrupted, failing to hide the note of panic in his voice, and then cursing himself for it. Elliott just looked at him for a moment. Harvey quickly had to think of what to say. I mean, would you care to switch things up? He said. I could dance with you. Surely Leia and Maru won't mind a change in partner. Maru was just telling me I mean, if you'd like to, I'd be more than willing to, well... Harvey trailed off and met Elliott's eyes again, only to watch him smile, and he felt himself melt all over again. When he saw the dim sadness in Elliott's eyes behind his smile, concern returned. I'd love to dance with you, Elliott said, failing to conceal the note of sorrow in his voice, as his hand gently touched the vine on his neck. He knew. He didn't know Harvey knew. He knew he was brinking on death. Harvey was not about to let this be Elliott's last spring dance. Something in Harvey spiked as he took Elliott's now offered hand, a feeling he usually attributed to life-saving surgery. In a way, it was nothing more than an emergency procedure, with a little extra weight to it, maybe calling the weight of costing someone their life for being too chicken to talk to them sooner wasn't best described as little, but he held a patient's life in his hands before. Feeling that seemed to help. He'd only ever lost one patient long ago, and he hadn't done it since. He knew standard emergency procedures off by heart, and could almost do it in his sleep. He stopped thinking about the need to save Elliott's life, and focused solely on that weight, that heavy feeling of tangled love and emotions. He stopped thinking about the flowers, stopped thinking about the what-ifs. He shut it all out of his mind, and reminded himself, as he stepped into position, that he was about to dance with the most amazing and wonderful person he had ever met. He was one dance away from true love. The music began slowly, as it always did, with gradual rises and falls. Both sides knew every step to every part. Harvey had never been the best dancer, but the flower dance was second nature, especially with Elliott leading. Maru and Leah shot them looks from behind Sebastian and Abigail, Maru's of surprise, and Leah's of confusion, but at least they weren't upset. Most of the dance was slow enough to harbor in some quick, if not a bit choppy, conversation. So, why me? Elliott finally began, after a quick move finished. As in, you could have asked anyone for variation. Why me? Part of me knew you wouldn't say no, Harvey said. It wasn't untrue, actually, but then he continued. I don't know. I guess I've always wanted to dance with you. I've just been putting it off. To be perfectly honest with you, Elliott replied, I've sort of felt a similar way. I've felt a lot of ways about you. Really? Harvey asked. failing to hide his surprise. "Yes, really," Elliott continued. "You're inspiring. You need no mask to hide who you are. You just are. And not everyone feels so honest. I know it's probably from being professional and all that, but you have a way with words, a way with truth. Like how truth is supposed to feel if lies feel so wrong. Am I making sense at all?" "Actually, you're making fine sense," Harvey replied. "A great deal of sense. So let me continue being honest." "Go right ahead," Elliott prompted. "I don't know feelings. I'm not good at them. At least not emotional ones," Harvey continued. "But I do know that you enchant me in ways I cannot describe. I can't put half-decent words to the rest of my feelings. I'm sorry." The apology was the most meaningful-seeming part he'd managed to say. He cursed himself for tripping over his words, and being unable to handle such a simple situation. The music changed, and Elliott shifted a hand to Harvey's shoulder, only to feel the slight crumbling of a blossom under his fingers, and his eyes went wide, sharing a glance with Harvey that carried more words than either of them knew. Harvey carefully rolled up his sleeve, enough to show one of the longer vines spread down to his wrist, where a cluster of yarrow bloomed, while also keeping to the dance. Their thoughts aligned, as Elliott saw it, but Harvey spoke first. "You somehow inspire my fear, and bury it at the same time," Harvey confessed. "Everything you feel about me, I can probably do feel about you, and more in ways my own words fail. Your words alone might have been enough to define this." The emotion between the two seemed to boil over sharply and suddenly. Elliott broke from the dance pattern and pulled Harvey in, holding him close around the middle, a gesture Harvey immediately returned. His hands could feel the tangled clumps of vines nearly covering Elliott's back. He felt Elliott try to steady his shaking breath as he rested against Harvey's shoulder. Harvey squeezed his eyes shut and hoped. Would it be enough? Could he go further? Would the flowers finally die, or would he lose what he loved? Elliott slightly drew away, but before Harvey could let go, Elliott's whispered ask of permission met his ear despite the music swelling again. It was all Harvey could do to nod in reply, before he felt a tender kiss graze the side of his face. The two seemed to fall back together after such a moment, as they both understood the worst and hoped for the best. Elliott bravely fought down crying into Harvey's shoulder, as the thorns violently twisted tighter around him. Harvey felt a sudden advancing too, and knew it was the vine's last effort at killing them both. He clung to Elliott, as if trying to keep the life as close to him as possible, sensing for breath, sensing for wilt, trying to feel what hope felt like. Elliott drew a deep, shuddering breath as the thorns loosened and began to wither. The first full breath he'd felt in months. The twisted vines that had plagued both of them crumbled into unseen dust before being carried away by the breeze as flower petals. Harvey forgot about the vines as soon as he realized he was clinging to love. True love. Love that would flood him and keep him safe and would never shatter. An immaculate love he would be more than willing to give in return forever and ever. After months of smelling nothing like lilies and yarrow, the ominous, threatening scent was replaced by some mixture of pomegranates and pickles.